From the Burned-Over District at the foothills of the Great Northern Wilderness, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. My name is Leah Prime, and this is the Invisible Night School. Thank you so much for joining the INS faculty this evening. Whether live or recorded, we're so glad you're here. You can check out the video description for a link to our open Discord server to connect with different guests and hosts. Without any further delay, I'd like to welcome the brilliant Campbell and our resident dubious layman, Nick Coffin Collis. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Very well. How are you doing?
It's just another day in paradise, man.
Excellent.
I'm battening down for the impending blizzard.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there's supposed to be like a big snowstorm to hit the Midwest. A lot of people are moving their travel around to
Northeast as well. Yeah, we're going to get hit hard up here in Ontario. I've got my generator ready to go, premium gas, so that it doesn't freeze. It's crazy. But yes, tonight, though, I am very excited to speak to our guest. I've been really looking forward to this one.
Me too.
Yes. All right. I guess that's my cue. I'll go ahead with the intro. So tonight we are joined by Jack Brewer, the author of The Greys Have Been Framed, Exploitation in the UFO Community, and Wayward Sons, NICAP and the IC. He blogs at the UFO Trail, which you can find at ufotrail.blogspot.com, and is on the board of Expanding Frontiers Research. So Jack, welcome to the Invisible Night School. We are so happy you're here.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Awesome.
Of course. I'm so sorry that Lewis isn't here, since I know he's done a number of interviews with you, or at least definitely one, actually, which I linked in the show description. But he was kind enough to pass on a few questions for us to go through this evening.
Good. Yes.
Jack,
always a pleasure to talk to Luis and you as well, Leah, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with Nick and Campbell as well.
Yeah. The motley crew here tonight. Oh, sorry, Campbell, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just wondering if Jack could give us a little bit of a rundown of what you've been working on historically in this UFO subject, and maybe a bit of what motivated you to get into it initially, just to bring everybody up to speed.
Sure. Like most people, I had an interest in the topic. You know, that's what brings people to these crazy conferences and start reading these paperbacks is generally we saw something, or we know people that do, or we were interested as kids, and or all of the above. And the more I got into it, and I was sincerely interested. So I was really frustrated when I would buy the latest paperbacks or attend the latest lectures. And this was like early 1990s, but before the internet was, you know, as around as it is now. And you had to, you know, like make travel plans and go meet these people and things like that. And I would get pretty frustrated. It became apparent rather quickly that there was a lot of sizzle compared to the amount of steak. And frequently, it was all to be revealed, and you walk away kind of scratching your head going, well, I guess that was interesting. And so because I was interested, I started trying to get with some of the higher profile people at the conferences, email them, get a hold of them. And the responses to questions, as Leah puts it sometimes, the reasonable interrogation process was not good. And this began to be a recurring
understatement of the century there, Jack.
Yes. And like specifically with people I was getting in touch with, like Bud Hopkins and people he had worked with, and seeing that there were sometimes conflicting stories even about the witnesses and what went in the book, that sometimes they would between the lines of what they were saying and their lack of willingness to talk on the record, pretty easy to begin to surmise that they had different accounts of their interaction than were making to these people's paperback books.
Mhm.
And this was concerning. And eventually I began to write a blog. In 2010, I started the UFO Trail, and it delved into places where the intelligence community and the UFO genre overlap. I got interested in that. I got interested in cases that there seemed to be deception involved and unclear motives. It's one thing when people are just hoaxing something for laughs. It's another thing when it involves people that, if they are sane, would not spend the resources and energy to undertake some of these complex hoaxes that have been done over the years. And a lot of times there's political implications, things like that. But it's easy to get sidetracked with all this. But that's how I got involved. Was I was sincerely interested, and because I was actually trying to drill down through stories that were widely published in paperbacks and magazines and documentaries and film that were not nearly as sensational as and interesting the closer you look, if not outright deceptive. It became, increasingly apparent, like with David Jacobs, for instance.
Mhm.
Just, what can only be described as just horrible failures in ethics and misrepresentations of scientific study. And so I felt like I had some things to blog about, and that led to the book, The Grays Have Been Framed, and increasingly more projects.
So when you mentioned the intelligence community essentially interacting with the UFO community, I think for a lot of people, and especially newer people to the subject, they immediately think of Richard Doty and the Benowitz situation. But in your research, you found that goes a lot further back, right?
Yes, it does. When I, even up to the time into the 2000s, when I was considering starting a blog, I wasn't largely interested in the intelligence community. I felt like it was probably an aspect of the UFO subculture.
Mhm.
And I came to view that the other way around, that
Right.
the UFO subculture was an aspect of the global and United States intelligence community. And yes, indeed, from the literal launching of the Central Intelligence Community in 1947 and the eventual incorporation of NICAP, what to date was pretty much considered the largest and most successful UFO research organization ever launched, got the first congressional hearings, things like that,
Mhm.
in the 1960s. One can only surmise through research that the CIA and the intelligence community were deeply involved and interested in the activities of NICAP. And even that in itself, to me, as I continued to research it, felt like another story that is misrepresented from the pro UFO faction of the community, in that it's really easy to blame all that on the CIA must have been investigating UFOs. They must have been wanting to know who major key host sources were and this kind of thing. But a closer look, again, when you drill down and you look at the actual documents and you look at the letters that were exchanged between these people, the things they were talking about, the things they weren't talking about, it becomes increasingly apparent that the NICAP founders had deep involvement with the UFO community or with the intelligence community, with the CIA. There's been lawsuits that tried to get some of the CIA records on some of these founders, and it was interesting to me that one journalist in particular in the 1970s that sued for the records of a man named Nicholas de Roquefort that was a NICAP organizer was not coming at it from the UFO angle at all. I don't think he was the least interested in UFOs. He was interested in Nicholas de Roquefort's activity in what's known as the China lobby in Washington, D.C., and his involvement in political affairs and lobbying Congress. And he had meetings and connections with influential people all the way to the Joint Chiefs of Staff he was meeting with. And so this one journalist felt that you know, he was, for a number of reasons I go over in the book, he was convinced that de Roquefort was a CIA asset. And so he sued for the records, was unsuccessful. The judge wrote that these kinds of things, an intelligence agency needs to be able to protect its sources and means, the judge felt. And if such records exist, sided with the CIA that they didn't have to release them. But I felt it very interesting that he wasn't even interested in UFOs. It was about all the political and spy intrigue, which to me makes it all the more apparent that the UFO thing was absurd, to think that this guy recreationally decided he'd help out these people running a UFO organization is just humorous. You know, it's just silly. And he was by far from the only one that had what 70 years later are clear ties to intelligence agencies that in hindsight we might suppose the NICAP may have been intended to act as a financial conduit for the CIA to distribute funds. It may have been to send what amounted to assets and spies around the globe under the guise of collecting UFO information. I say that because some other people that were involved with organizing NICAP ran a PR and consulting firm that had contracts in China and sent representatives to China that were contracted just for that work, that in hindsight is a little suspicious. And the company they were contracted with, I obtained letters from the director of Central Intelligence that indicated this company was a CIA asset as well. And just I could just go on and on and on about all the circumstances. So yes, very much from the absolute very beginnings, the UFO topic and the intelligence community is inseparable.
Same as it ever was.
Yeah.
As a historian, Jack, you know, when we look at history, it's inevitable that there are real conspiracies that occur in history. Noam Chomsky, regardless of you like his politics, and fantastic historian on this subject. He's demonstrated conclusively significant number of real conspiracies in history. And he also indicated that in order to visually appear that a conspiracy is happening, it can be that people are not actually conspiring, but people in a similar socioeconomic position operating independently will appear to be in a conspiracy, and the outcomes will look identical to as if they actually were conspiring. Now, within this subject, it's unquestionable that there have been proven a significant number of CIA conspiracies throughout the 20th century, and I imagine into the 21st. The trick, I mean, certainly is to know which ones are still to be discovered. And so as a historian, would you be able to dig in a little bit to how you distinguish between a conspiracy versus a conspiracy theory?
That's a really good question.
Sure. Pardon me?
I was admiring the question.
Yes. Well, just for starters, what your statement and question make me think of is around the Twitterverse right now, there are rumblings about the intelligence community was using Twitter, and it had sock puppet accounts, and it had informed the certain members of the Twitter staff that it wanted protection of these accounts, and that like that's some of the rumors I see. I haven't dug into it. And this was like common knowledge, I mean, for years. I mean, like in The Graves Have Been Framed, I quoted newspaper articles from mainstream journalists that England had what it called a Facebook warriors platoon. The Israeli defense offices and agencies made no mistake about it. They released information as if to show, as if they were proud of it, and to show we are keeping up with the technology and the times, and we've got our citizens covered. That they claimed massive activity on social media. And so now when I see this, I can appreciate journalists that have some confirmation about which account, and here's an email. But I do kind of resent and wonder about conspiracy theories compared to actual conspiracies. Who is it advantageous to dig this back up and pull all this out and talk about it, when those of us that were even paying mild attention have known that, besides it being relatively common sense, that they told us they had accounts on social media. I mean, the CIA's first tweet was, "We can neither confirm nor deny this is our first tweet." I mean, they like we're trolling us that we've been trolling you.
They certainly are.
Yeah, and so that's what the first thing that comes to mind to me with what you're talking about. But yes, I have joked about I'm a card-carrying conspiracy theorist. I just want some evidence for the conspiracy. There has to be more than rumors and accusations, and it's easy to think dots connect that don't, indeed. And coincidences do happen. Strange things do happen. It challenges a writer, a video content creator, a blogger. It challenges us to make sure we've got the validation for circumstances. And for me, one of the best ways to come at that is seek authentic documents, seek documents from intelligence agencies, government agencies, use the Freedom of Information Act, use local records acts. Like in Utah, there's the GRAMA, they call it, that you can submit for records at county clerk offices and things like that. Get what you can, then go to the people it's about and ask them. And just ask them on the record, what's their story with this? How do they defend it? What's their side? Try to do it, in a non-accusatory manner. Just, ask them, what's the deal? And then, if possible, find expert opinion on the circumstances. Like if it's an ethical breach, if it's claiming to be conducting scientific investigation, but you have doubts about that, ask a scientist. Ask qualified experts to weigh in on the circumstances. And in that way, when we're writing about it, maybe do minimal editorializing and I recognize whether we're doing a piece on reporting or whether we're doing an essay that's an editorial. Those are some things I'd say could be helpful. What about you guys? How do y'all differentiate and things like that?
Well, I guess I can answer first since I asked the question. To me, the most basic is along the lines of what you described, verifiability and the degree of verifiability, the quality of the evidence, and whether the evidence originates in academic sources that are well cited or not. The foundation to me is if it's been verified or not.
Right. Reserve your judgment until you can conclusively make a judgment.
And I guess the question of verification becomes very interesting, and maybe there's a little bit of, I know it when I see it, but then there are also external standards that we can choose to consciously apply to our reasoning, like the scientific method and things like that, which arguably produce a net advantage to us when we're trying to accurately predict the nature of reality. Nick, what about you? What's your kind of general take on that?
I mean, essentially what I said. I try to refrain conclusive judgment on things until we have a verifiable, conclusive evidence. You know what I mean? So, like I say a lot on these things, I'm open, and I'll listen to conspiracy theory, of course, but I never feel comfortable staking my belief in it until we can get something. And I know, there's always the appeal to authority and stuff like that, but there are authority is a large word. So, experts in fields obviously take come with. I'm losing my train of thought here. But yeah, I reserve my judgment until there's enough evidence there to make a conclusive stance. Leah.
Yes, I'm back too. Sorry about that. My computer was lagging. This is a great question. One of the things that I regularly ask people and ask myself is what makes them trust a source? And then also, how do they evaluate expertise in areas with which they have no familiarity? Basically, what's this sort of meta heuristic of discerning whether or not someone is knowledgeable and trustworthy and reliable in fields of study or on subjects that you may personally not have any familiarity? I'm certainly also a bit anti-authoritarian, but this is one of those instances where I think it's helpful to rely on some degree of credentialism, to look at the institutions and colleagues or peers of an individual or organization that may speak to the quality and trustworthiness of an individual in an organization. I'm also particularly in this subject, especially in this subject, I would say that I am categorically averse to anyone who proclaims having any definitive, meaningful conclusions.
Yeah.
If they're not, I'm a big believer in strong opinions loosely held. So if they're not if there's not a demonstrated track record of regularly revisiting, reevaluating, and refactoring views and opinions, then I'm somewhat less skeptical, or I'm somewhat less, I don't trust them as much. Let me put it that way. If there's not this sort of self-interrogation and accountability that is exhibited in some meaningful fashion.
There is a book by the talented Sharon Weinberger called Imaginary Weapons. And it was about her exploration of DARPA funded work on a hafnium bomb that was such a limited area of expertise that the peer review was very challenging. And there were people that were telling her, as she was studying these grants that were being funded and refunded, that were telling her that their opinions was the scientists and grant writers were full-on charlatans. Mm-hmm. And there were people, of course, involved in the programs that were completely defending their work and saying, if other people can't duplicate our experiments and get the same results, it's because they're incompetent and they don't know how. And she started being like, as she portrayed to readers, I don't know about that. You ought to be, if it's so complicated, you can't explain what you're doing, maybe it's not somebody else's fault. And the bottom line, they eventually, DARPA stopped funding the program and never did get their hafnium bomb out of it. But what Leah says there reminds me of that. Such a limited field of expertise that and I thought about that book and Weinberger's work a number of times during all the ATIP and OSAP arguments that because very much people like Pudoff and Eric Davis and Kelleher and that band present themselves as, I'm the guy to see about things going bump in the night and scientific investigation. Get me on your military funded, ghost project. And some of the people, in fact, in Weinberger's book do overlap with the UFO community. Some of the people that she was in contact with trying to figure out, these guys getting millions of dollars for a bomb they weren't producing. Yeah.
One of the dynamics that I find most puzzling in this community is that there is this tension between recognizing and acknowledging, to some degree, government involvement in this space, while simultaneously just uncritically trusting government voices. And this is something I struggle with because I understand, I guess I feel, I understand empathetically the inclination to do so, but I find this unwillingness to apply critical reasoning to the subject deeply kind of troubling. And also an unwillingness to have hard conversations, whether with government officials or with any other researcher. And I feel like that unwillingness or that fear propagates through the community and fundamentally does a complete disservice to it, regardless of where in the community an individual or group of individuals sits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you made a really good point about don't be a fence sitter. At some point you need to land on one side or the other of an issue, or at least how to resolve an issue. When you spoke with Erica Lukes a while back, I thought you made a really good point about that. And along those lines, a while back, a few years ago, some material came out about Jacques Vallée and some supposedly information he had about CIA conducting simulated UFO abductions. And there's a whole story around what this material and the story probably was. But for the point of this discussion, I reached out to Dr. Vallée, and he did not want to produce the material, did not want to verify it, offer a means to verify it, just wanted to tell me it's in his notes and they'll be available 10 years after his death or at some point or whatever. And today I was reading an article that Erica passed along to me and was asking, what I thought about it. And this was from the early 1990s. And one of the people cited in the article is Dr. Vallée again. And in this instance, it was about what's only referred to in the article as an otherwise unnamed colonel that showed some fascist tendencies and some apparent Nazi sympathies. And Vallée does not name this person in that article. And I begin to have some issues with how that becomes some convoluted form of peacekeeping or not backbiting, or why are we talking about it at all if we're not going to talk about who it was and verifying it? And so I'm just supposed to believe you because your name's Vallée? I mean,
Oh,
that would be convenient.
I'm living through my own mini UFO Twitter drama right now about providing receipts.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah, that sounded really familiar.
Yes, yeah, like being asked to present receipts for any claims I'm making. I provide receipts, and then that makes people very upset, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there's this kind of it's like a deep perversion of that John Lennon song lyric, "A dream we dream together is reality," where like there's this collective dream, and any even good-natured attempt to ask questions about that dream is met with just tremendously emotional pushback and like total dismissal. And usually like I think, just speaking personally, like I'm so consistently troubled by the unwillingness of people to have hard conversations. And Jack, one of the things I said to Erica in our discussion a few weeks back was basically that like good vibes only becomes like lubricant for bad actors.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm definitely not the freaking UFO police. Like I have a very healthy disrespect for authority, but I think it's also really important as people just involved in this community to have standards of integrity that we hold ourselves to and we hold other people to. There's very few things we can judge others on except for who they associate with and the views that they publicly declare. And I think like being very selective about those things is part of what keeps a community healthy, even if it's uncomfortable to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. That's certainly a reasonable point of view, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, Jack, I might try to pivot into one of Luis's questions right now, actually, because we've sort of been talking a little bit about this apparent merger between the UFO private investigation groups and the intelligence community. And when you look back at the history in the 60s and the 50s with NICAP, the organization that was founded by Kehoe and others, right? And there was the first CIA director was on the board of directors for like 8 years or something, right? And
this is correct.
The rear admiral in the Navy who was responsible for the missile testing program was on the board of directors. And we know that there were tons of, UFO alleged cases at White Sands with the missile testing, because that was the first time they'd implemented radar tracking, high resolution cameras, and there were allegedly things being seen. So it's an interesting thing. Now, it's up for debate still whether there's actually a genuine physical phenomenon occurring. And this is what I want to kind of lead into here. Now, Luis is asking in one of his written in questions. He says, do you think that the apparent preponderance of psychological warfare in counterintelligence people in NICAP during the 50s and 60s could have been due to a psychological predisposition among these people to simply be drawn to intrigue and mystery, rather than something that was part of an operation?
I cannot discount that, no. I tend to think that whatever the reasons were, whatever the objectives were, I think that there were key intelligence officials who were working when they got involved with NICAP. I think others may have come along for various reasons, ranging from interest to that their buddies were doing it, that there's a certain tribalism among CIA officers, that they'll support one another. But at the core, I think there were some officers that were conducting some type of information retrieval or a number of things. I think pretty much all of the explanations we could just kind of hypothetically come up with, I think, were on the table for use at different times over the years, as well as probably a few that we wouldn't think of without more information. And one of the main reasons I think of that way is I generally tell this in a couple different ways. And one way, for context, is if you so much as worked for the school board, or you were you had a position of responsibility in a high profile local industry, you would think twice about going and giving statements to the newspaper about UFOs. So that should kind of give us some context of how much more consideration you'd give it if you were a former director of the CIA, or if you were, in the case of Colonel Joseph Bryan, you had ran a psychological operation and a psychological warfare committee, and I'm sorry, I got distracted there. My pop-up jumped up on me. In the case of Colonel Bryan, he operated a psychological warfare team for the CIA, and then ended up on the board of directors with the former DCI Hillenkoetter and others there at NICAP. I just don't think you do that. You don't moonlight and do that recreationally. And besides it just being, something you could deduce and surmise, some of the material I discovered in researching and putting together the book Wayward Sons about NICAP and the IC included, in the FBI, there was a clerk at the New Orleans field office that thought NICAP was cool and wanted to go to meetings and join. And this clerk knew to ask. And apparently a special agent at the New Orleans office even felt it was over his pay grade and asked Washington. And it went all the way to Hoover, who made it clear in no uncertain terms that their public stance on NICAP and any organization was that we neither endorse nor oppose. Our job in the Department of Justice is to conduct investigations. But make no mistake, we do not want to be involved with this organization and make it inadvertently appear that we endorse or are in league with NICAP. So for that to be the stance they take with a clerk at a field office, I think says a lot about that. A guy that ran a psychological warfare unit for the CIA would just shrug and say, "That sounds kind of fun. I'll help out." I got time between my trips to Europe. Can I investigate a case? Yeah, it's kind of an insult to intelligence again.
Well, that's an interesting point because, as we know, Luis Elizondo says effectively something to that effect, really, with his narrative surrounding his continued on the side, off the books investigations, and we have well for some time now Jim Semivan, this questionable character who nobody seems to know who he is the only public information on LinkedIn that he had posted suggested he worked for the Government Accountability Office, but then interview with George Knapp, he is introduced as a former assistant director to counterintelligence at the CIA. And then he tells an outrageous story on Theories of Everything with Kurt, where he says, "Oh, I heard about this guy Tom DeLonge." Actually, it was the interview with Tom DeLonge because he was involved with the starting of To the Stars, right? And then he's saying, so me and a bunch of the ex CIA guys, we got together and we periodically meet and we talk about are there people getting information from inside the agency? And we got together. We're like, is Tom getting information from inside the agency? Because a lot of the stuff he's saying sounds like accurate. So I reached out to him and I, ascertained, no, this guy's for legit. It's all legit sources and stuff. And I decided I'd try to help him out with what he's doing. And,
what a bro! Just help him out.
It's a stunning admission, and I have it saved exactly where it is because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It made no sense to me that he was saying this out loud. He's saying a group of CIA people getting together to conspire to try to shut down leaks from inside the government. He's just saying this out loud. Whatever. There's no verification that he even worked for the CIA, as far as I know. Yeah, and I believe, as far as I can recall, Jack, you actually are the one who has been appealed to many times because you are the one who actually initially FOIA'd trying to see if he worked for the CIA at any point. So I'm just wondering, as just a quick follow-up, and then we can move on. Did you ever get anything back from that yet, or is that in process? And what are your general thoughts about Semivan, just quickly?
My general thoughts about Jim Semivan are the same as I would say about anyone else, as far as cool story, bro. Do you have
that's very millennial of you, Jack.
Yeah. I mean, ID card, accommodation, anything, point of contact for, like if you go to get a home loan, who do you tell the bank to call? The CIA has contingencies for this. It's not like their undercover people don't, need health insurance and things like that. And the Office of Public Affairs did not respond. And so my next effort was, and Semivan, I specifically asked, and he said, no, I don't have anything that I can give you. And so, yeah, really a big interesting part about that too is what it says about everybody just says you were with the CIA because you said so. Okay, put it in the newspaper, I guess. And another aspect of it that was interesting to me is what I ended up doing was submitting a FOIA request to the CIA for all of the recipients of the award that he claimed he got, and that other guy that was telling stories about being a childhood abductee and everything.
It's a brilliant
David
angle.
Adair. Oh my God, I like how we all had different names. I said David Adair.
I said brilliant angle.
Oh.
No, the other guy.
Mhm.
You know, and I'm serious. It was another guy.
Of course, yeah.
Oh.
But and all I asked for was the recipients from like whatever year he said he got it. I went back a couple years before that for like a 5-year frame that are unclassified that you've announced were given these medals. And I don't know, you know, whenever I wrote that article, a year and a half, they still haven't responded, you know, and all I asked was for unclassified. Who have you acknowledged has been given this award? And no, they have not responded yet.
Oh, that's a shame.
You know, I want to, when Jack and I were back channeling before the show, I explicitly told him that I was going to ask about this because I think it's helpful both for the panel's edification and also for listeners. But I would love, Jack, if you could tell us a little bit about your research process, both in how you locate and find materials, and then also just the kind of workflow that you employ in collecting research and then using it to surface different insights and materials.
Sure. I use a lot of word programs. I type stuff down, my thoughts, my ideas about something, and I'll start putting links in a program that I'll just name that file, you know, what the topic is. And so, because it doesn't work for me to have links scattered, I'll say, you know, a million links saved that I don't even remember what they're to. So I'll start explaining what these links are to myself for me to look later. And from that, I will start getting, it will become increasingly apparent what I should file FOIA requests on, and start trying to get some authentication about perhaps the NICAP board of directors. Everybody says this guy was CIA. Where can we actually find that he was, and not just quote some, you know, 1982 UFO newsletter? So I'll take the 82 newsletter, the FOIAs, and try to get more and more to the source of how we know someone was in an intelligence agency, or how we know they were a speaker at a certain conference on a certain date, things like that. And then, as we were discussing at the beginning, when I feel like I have a reasonable amount of material that puts a story together, puts a person with an agency, puts them somewhere at a certain time, puts them at a UFO con that they were being paid by a county to appear at, then I will ask that person, what do you have to say for yourself? What's your take on this story, like the one that Erica and I did recently, where like, what's your take that you have financial incentives to keep this narrative going and to suppress information that is counter to UFOs and goblins and stuff? And then that's pretty much what the story will be, what I come up with in that process.
I'm a really big fan of your blog, The UFO Trail. But as Leah was pointing out earlier, a lot of the community kind of is unwilling to have those hard conversations. And while I am, like I said, a big fan of your blog, I feel like that is kind of the audience that it should be going to, right? How do you write skeptically for the UFO community and have them be receptive to it, because that is something that I've tried to do and failed in the past years. I used to write a skeptical magazine years ago, and the whole premise behind that was to direct it towards the believers in this group and get conversations going. And it's something I talk with Campbell a lot too. How do we engage with the people kind of with different beliefs and then come to an understanding and get them to have these, as Leah put, hard conversations?
That is a great question, and I don't really have an answer for it other than it's important to identify our objectives. And Erica and I talk about that kind of thing all the time. What's the objective here? What are we trying to accomplish? I don't think that changing minds is a good idea, a good goal.
Yes.
I didn't always feel that way. I think the political climate made me even more towards that thought. It just gets so emotional and so personal, and it's just so often it's not about evidence. And I could be talking about politics or UFOs here. It's not about evidence. It's not about truth. It's just about, I sure do hope that I can make this person feel bad today. You know, like that's so many people's goal, it seems. And so in that way, I feel like the time that I wrote the UFO Trail and the 2 books was useful in that I elevated the voices of some people that didn't feel heard. And that was important to me. And in doing that, I feel like I was able to kind of tell my story through them as well. That I feel like I got influenced during the earlier part of my life a lot by people that are charismatic and can tell good stories, and that those stories may be harmful to people to different extents, to how much they choose to believe it, how much they identify with it, how seriously they take it. And in The Grays Have Been Framed, I went pretty deep with that into some areas that some writers that are probably smarter than me, and certainly some that are more experienced than I am, chose not to go. They just choose not to go into the abduction thing and the hypnosis and all that, it just gets too sticky. And I decided to pull it all out in its ugly glory and just put pretty much 90% of what I know about it, from dealing with people like Leah Haley, Emma Woods, Carol Rainey, and some others into that book. And then there were other stories as well that didn't involve the abduction theme, but like Simone Mendez, who got caught up serving as an airman on a U.S. Air Force base, got caught up in a story about supposed UFO documents being passed around, and affected the rest of her life. And so I felt like it was important to some of them, the work I did, and that made it important to me. And then I was able to, I felt like, show some of the harm and the danger that this stuff can represent, without really including my own personal circumstances in it, that I got to where it was almost therapeutic for me to work on other people's stories rather than just keep mucking around in my own, and that was meaningful to me. So I don't think we can change minds, but that doesn't mean there can't be good reasons to take a skeptical approach to it and maybe do some good work with it as well.
Jack, this was, I just want to say this is a wonderfully compassionate answer. And it's something, I have a history of doing a lot of political and social work, and have come around similarly on this idea that we really can't change minds. And so instead, it's incumbent on us to do three things, which is to set the example we'd like to see by others, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Like, that's really when it matters most, is when it's hard. Also, to make it safe for other people to change their minds. And I think that that's a dynamic that is frequently left out of these conversations. It's incumbent on us to make it safe for people to alter their views without denigrating them or making fun of them or anything, and instead to welcome these change of hearts and change of views. And then third, to present information, especially, like I said, going back about setting the example, presenting information, especially when it's hard to present information. And I feel like, I do keep going back to this idea of like what good stewardship looks like in this community. What does it mean to be a culture carrier in this community in a way that improves it, not only for our individual experiences, but for the community's experience? And based on your experience in this space, and sort of the many different stories you've lived in writing your books and your blog, what are your thoughts on good stewardship in this community? What does it look like? And how can we kind of carry the torch into a new generation of researchers?
The first thing that comes to mind is sincerity. I think what you said there, Leah, is powerful. I think it's accurate. I think that if people are being sincere, there has to be room for that, and it's okay for them to be wrong. And then, as you so aptly pointed out, there has to be room for them to say I was wrong, and that doesn't mean that they're exiled from further discussion and the community. And this kind of goes back to discussing the scientific process. As I was working on interviews and emails and interacting with Leah Haley and Emma Woods, for instance, it occurred to me during that point in time that, of course, their ideas about things that had been happening to them changed over time, because for that not to be the case would mean that people are just right about everything right from the beginning, and that never changes. And that's just not realistic. Yet we do see a lot of insincerity along those lines in the UFO community. People that will cling to their narrative about a case for 30 years or something like that and just stop incorporating new information into the equation. And I very much felt that people like Leah Haley and Emma Woods and others needed to be supported for that willingness to tap the brakes and say, this really just doesn't make sense. I'm not sure that this is a good thing that has happened in my life, and I need to rethink this. And there's a lot of complications around all of that. It's sticky. It's real sticky. But certainly averting from it is not part of the solution. And because if we avert from it, we're just continuing to allow organizations to enable hypnotists and people that traffic in these stories and needed these hypnosis subjects in order to come up with these stories.
The historical focus on hypnosis from an evidence-based perspective is clearly highly problematic, and it's an interesting question to what extent it was known at the time that it was not actually producing accurate results. And just a very brief thing I recalled in that line, you mentioned the former FBI director Hoover. There are memos that we have written by him verifying that he knew that lie detector tests were not accurate. That's just, he knew that. We also have memos that he is using them to get people convicted for things. So that's a conspiracy. I mean, so they're doing this stuff. That said, then you have to infer all the other things. Now, this is an interesting thing in this subject where the more I've sort of gotten into trying to figure stuff out, the more I tend to just bring it up to friends and stuff like that. And I'd like to hear your opinion about this. When I say something to the effect of, I sort of do like UFO skeptic stuff, sort of arguing against the extraterrestrial hypothesis and things like that, if I bring that up to like a casual friend, the next time I see them, they'll say something like, "Oh, how's the alien stuff going?" And so it's like if I sort of leaned into becoming a Christian skeptic, it feels a little bit like people would think I was a Christian. Based on the way that the UFO topic has such a stigma that it seems to touch and poison anything that comes into contact with it. And I'm wondering, Jack, if you've had this experience yourself, that it produces a stigma to some extent to even investigate it critically, and if that is the case, if what you have done to try to counter that.
Oh, hell yes. I would suspect you guys have found that you probably have suspected, if people didn't outright tell you, that potential guests declined invitations or didn't come on if they see what some of your past topics have been about, or what Invisible Night School is a reference to. It's like, look, I got a good gig writing for the Post. I don't need to get involved in this stuff, And yeah, absolutely, that comes up. My personal experience is with casual acquaintances, like neighborhood block parties, things like that. I would just as soon they not know, because I don't want to deal with them telling me, CNN reported that they're real, man. I saw it on TV, because then I'll just be like, yeah, that's who brought the salad. It's pretty good, I'm not gonna be the guy at the party that turns into Cliff Clavin and it's like, well, actually,
Yes.
1983, but yeah, one of the reasons that is certainly played a factor in the name of the nonprofit organization being Expanding Frontiers Research, picking up other topics, wanting to go into other social areas of interest, in order to potentially appeal to people who do not want to be associated with the UFO topic, and appeal in a number of ways. And the stigma is very much earned. I'm sad to say it's earned. Are there reasonable legitimate topics to look at that are associated with UFOs? Absolutely, there are. The things we've been talking about, NICAP, the political landscape that's associated with UFOs, the media's dance with UFOs, all of that would be major news if it were about a different topic. You know, it would be major news, which is something to discuss in itself. That you know, I did a blog post at EFR recently on that the involvement with UFOs colored the legacies of CIA officers that otherwise, I mean, like Hillenkoetter might be remembered as the father of mind control research. You know, I mean, before there was Sidney Gottlieb and MK Ultra, there was Hillenkoetter signing off on Bluebird. You know, that set up an office of psychologists in DC that were indoctrinating research subjects. So, do historians know more about that than people in the UFO community? Yes, they do. But certainly, those of us involved in UFOs tend to have a much more fond view of this Hillenkoetter guy, that pretty much what most people know about Hillenkoetter is just some quote that they saw on a website somewhere, and he was pro UFO, so he's good in their book, you know. And but yes, the stigma is earned. It's if people are involved in my life, like in the real life community I live in, I just assume them not even know of what I do and all. It's problematic. It just is, you know, it's problematic.
Yeah, I hear you. I just gave a professional interview and managed to get through all the questions without talking about UFOs once. Anyone who would see this interview would think there were two Leahs, Leah and Leah Prime, I guess. And it's interesting. So my experience around the stigma in this subject is almost that this is like the love that dare not speak its name, where the moment somebody finds out it's an interest of mine, people love to talk about it. They want to talk to me about what they've seen, what they've heard, what I think. So it does, in many respects, feel kind of like the ultimate or final social taboo. Um, Although I do also believe that that stigma is almost kind of internally generated. Like, I think a lot of people think there's a stigma, but um, my experience has been that it's probably not as stigmatized as a researcher as it is from someone who's claiming to have an experience, or, you know, something like that, something truly like kind of pretty far out versus, hey, there's this weird thing that I'm into and you should probably know about it, right? I'm not sure how many dates in I'd get before I'd disclose that to someone. Um, but you know, I just think this is like, how do we navigate this stigma? Um, and I think more than that, how do we consider the relationship between this subject, and I'm going to go there, guys, and far right and alt right talking points? And I bring this up because there's a huge amount of passes given to um, people in this community where they're just written off as, well, it's okay because he was talking about UFOs, right? Like
All the
like all the time, right? And I struggle with this a lot because I feel like when the alt right or the far right picks up ufology as a subject, it is done with the underlying intention of contributing to this epistemological crisis and undermining like the government and undermining sort of shared truth and reality. And but on the other hand, I think I guess this is all a very windy way to try and broach the topic about how these ideas are being co-opted basically for nefarious purposes, politically and socially and culturally. And what kind of role do we have in that? And how do we interrogate it?
Go ahead. One of you guys.
I mean, what I keep coming back to is similar to what I said about the willingness to set the example and to basically be as impeccable in personal conduct and behavior as possible so that when you raise questions or when you raise issues about this stuff, people listen. If you're constantly sort of neurotically generating polemics, like the boy who cried wolf, people stop listening.
Mhm.
But if you kind of selectively and intelligently choose your battles and you otherwise show yourself to be a good steward acting with high integrity, people do pay attention. It's not necessarily comfortable, but they do pay attention.
It's really alarming how many excuses you see. These UFO figureheads going on Tucker Carlson, someone who preaches the white replacement theory. They're saying like, well, Tucker's bad, but at least he's getting the UFO narrative out there. But this is a narrative that's existed for my entire life. It's a narrative that's existed, since 1947. It's part of pop culture. So, mainstreaming a narrative that already exists isn't a good excuse to be, supporting something like that, in my opinion. I think staying consistent with your own morals, even if you love UFOs, is really important, like you said, Leah, because it's getting more frequent. I think there was a Tucker special on it a night ago about those searchlights.
Mm-hmm.
It's challenging too, about are we crossing the aisle and trying to, in a show of good faith, or are we being manipulated sometimes too by these podcasts? Because it's not just high-end news organizations. It's it trickles down as well. When I was getting ready to be interviewed in, I guess, 2016, one time, for when the Grays had just come out, I'm in the electronic green room waiting to come on, and I'm hearing these two guys. They're just going off, man, about right-wing extremist stuff, and I'm thinking, wow. And I'm thinking, what should I do? And I went ahead and I stuck with it and I did the show. But yeah, it was weird. It was like, wow, I thought we were here to talk about UFOs. I guess I got that wrong. We were just, maybe just to pull people, like it becomes difficult to tell, are they pulling my people or am I pulling theirs? What are we doing here? How much do they overlap? And the article that I mentioned earlier, that Erica shared with me, was written in 1993, and that's what it was about. Was this author was concerned about people with political agendas are pulling UFO interested people in, and give them 2 or 3 sentences on UFOs, and then 90% of their content on how to fix the problem with this or that ethnic group or race, and that goes again, back to the 70s, the 50s. The UFO topic has always been exploited and used in that way, and it's really frustrating to see people argue that when like there's only 2 ways they can argue that: they're ignorant and unaware of it, or they're being intentionally obtuse and don't want because they're doing it right now. You know, it is an issue. It always has been, and you know, it's exploitation.
Is everyone in the audience and on the panel is I'm sure exhausted of hearing me talk about. I'm fairly involved in the psychedelic community from the perspective of integrated healing, and like medical applications, all above board, blah blah blah. But I bring this up because we also see a similar encroachment in that space of alt right and far right, both funders and views and champions. And it feels like the common theme here is at the core of these subjects, whether psychedelic experience or ufology or spirituality, is the subjective experience. And the far right and sort of authoritarian sympathies understand that the subjective experience is something that can be deliberately shaped and formed in particular directions, and that there are extremely efficacious spaces in which to participate in that shaping and forming. Um, and it, it feels to me that we have to almost thread this needle between recognizing sort of the low information zone and the subjectivity of this topic and this community, while also taking or having deliberate heuristics and boundaries about what's acceptable within these spaces, right? We don't want to criminalize thought or views or ideas, but we also want to make sure that exclusionary and harmful views and practices don't take a foothold. And I mean, we run into, I guess, like the paradox of tolerance, right? Where by virtue of tolerating anyone and everyone in this community, individuals are also able to leverage some of the best parts of the community against itself, you know, by exploiting this willingness to tolerate all variety of experience and views. And that's why I think I keep coming back to this idea of like, how do you identify and measure and assess good actors versus bad? How do you identify and assess reliability or expertise? And it feels to me just increasingly that this is at the heart of so much of our modern experience. And I think what we're seeing here is happening in every subculture I'm a member of. It's not just ufology. It's literally every other community I'm a member of is contending with these questions because the fascist creep, so to speak, and everyone can get mad in my DMs. I'm not speaking for my panelists here, but it's gaining traction in pretty startling ways, especially in these kind of otherwise subversive or oppositional subcultures.
On Invisible Night School, we've emphasized historically that we are not a monolith, and I think that's
Yeah.
certainly true, although we do have shared opinions, clearly. On this subject, I was having some thoughts when we were talking before, and I'd like to introduce a bit of a challenge to what was being presented. I am of the opinion that people's opinions and beliefs can be changed, and I base that opinion on the scientific study of influence and advertising, promotions, sales. There is a huge body of evidence showing that humans do not prioritize information in making decisions. What they prioritize is in-group identification. And the reason for that is that historically, ostracization from your in-group was the likeliest cause of death. And so you prioritize maintaining your participation in an in-group over information content. And so studies that have been done in university settings when they're trying to teach highly religious people about evolution is that you ignore the information content and you focus exclusively on the philosophy guiding their assessment of evidence. And that is, in my opinion, the most critical thing that we need to do is we need to look at, as people who advocate for standards of evidence, I believe that we need to actually look at evidence relating to communicating the information we're trying to communicate. And that's been something I've been focusing very heavily on. And so
Interesting.
I guess I'm trying to get at, I think there's some hope here. I think that we actually, just like we're describing these bad actors are influencing behavior, the same tools are available to us to influence positive behavior. And, it's sort of up to us to reach out and grab those tools that the wealthiest, I won't go too far into it, but the wealthiest class of people are spending, what is it, over $100 billion a year just in the United States on marketing every year because it works.
I think we could consider too that there are different demographic people within this demographic. And there are the extremists that it's going to be very difficult to get them to even dialogue in good faith. Then there are the centrists who I have had approach me and tell me that they appreciated my work, that they thought that To the Stars was going to be great. They've always been interested in UFOs, but they really got excited after 2017. It's so disappointing to see it's just another scam. Like, this is the kind of things I hear, but they'd rather know, and they appreciate stuff like I do. So there's people like that too. So it definitely depends on who we're talking to, and what's important to us, like why we would want to change minds. Why is that, or is that not important? What is a person trying to do? Yeah.
I think there is a distinction between changing minds and being a good influence, like Leo was talking about earlier, stewardship in a community. I know this wasn't your intent, Campbell, but the way you kind of proposed it almost seemed manipulative and, kind of putting a narrative into people's minds, when I think, like, ideally we want to be promoting critical thinking so people can reflect and come to these conclusions on their own, I imagine, right?
Absolutely. My point would be that influence and manipulation are essentially the same thing, just from different perspectives, right? It's like one person's terrorist is the next person's freedom fighter, right? So on this subject, I would simply say, if we can agree that some worldviews are more pro-social, better for the world than others, then we have some basis to argue that there are good reasons to prefer some worldviews over others. And in the interests of building a better world that we all want to live in, we should advocate for trying together to build that world through influencing people to believe in human rights, to believe in equity. You need to influence somebody to believe in equity. And the question of whether that's a good or a bad thing kind of depends on who you ask, I think.
That's a good point.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Ooh, I like it when you guys ask each other hard questions.
And there is a certain amount of salesmanship, whether we identify it as such or not, that goes into we really could go from virtually everything, but certainly to the way a website is presented, how I decided which shirt I was going to wear tonight. All of that plays into presenting a position and a narrative that we want people to embrace favorably. And I very much agree, Campbell, that we then have our own codes of ethics to make, to decide where that reasonable salesmanship becomes false representation and just marketing a story to try to keep ourselves in the spotlight and sell products and services. And I'm certain over the years in this genre, there have been people frustrated that felt like they could have been much more successful financially and with followers had they had a lower standard of ethics than they did. If they had gone for the clicks rather than the good research and the good material, they would have perhaps, been more successful at it, depending on what the objective is. That's going to keep coming up too.
I don't remember who said it, but I've heard UFO stands for unlimited financial opportunity. Right? The grift goes deep, and I think without coming off as patronizing, I do feel like it can overwhelmingly burden vulnerable people as well. Like people that are looking for answers, either for their own experience that may be to some degree traumatic. I say that without conferring judgment on people's experiences, but who are seeking meaning and answers and connection on something, both as a researcher and even as an experiencer, who are then taken advantage of by bad actors. And I feel like that is fundamentally woven into the history of this community.
It is absolutely. There's no getting around that either. When I was writing The Grays, what kept jumping out at me was the relevance and the significance of the symptoms of trauma compared to their lack of discussion. Pretty much everyone involved, from one case to the next that I was exploring, would agree that the circumstances were traumatic for the witness, and no one was suggesting treatment for trauma from a qualified professional. If anything, the opposite is conditioned and reinforced, that psychologists won't understand, therapists won't understand. So hang out online with this guy that says he's an expert at writing paperbacks and has interviewed hundreds of abductees, because your PhD psychologist will only make you worse, is woven into the narrative. It absolutely is. And it's concerning, it's distressing. And while those narratives come and go, like the abduction angle isn't what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, it'll be back. This stuff always comes back. And yeah, and you guys were talking about when did they know? In the 1950s, CIA consultant and hypnosis expert Dr. Martin Ornay informed the agency that the secret weapon of hypnosis is lead the subject to believe I have a secret weapon. They knew. I mean, they've always known. The experts have. They've always known that it was not a reliable memory enhancer, and that it was dependent on the subject to believe they were defenseless to the interrogation technique, and to give them permission to give them the information that you wanted. And I mean, it was disgusting, distressing, concerning to go through the MK Ultra material, to go through the articles by former and current experts like Dr. Julia Shaw and Dr. Elizabeth Loftus on how to manipulate statements from people, because again and again, they are like describing what UFO investigators do. The friendly environment, speculative information mixed with accurate information, leading questions. 45 minutes later, you've got your story that you could have written before you went in, you know?
Mm-hmm. I'd love to use this as a springboard, though, into another question for you. Given there's sort of no well-defined expertise or background that we can look to for people in this field, or I would say studying this subject, in your view, like, what are the ways that this preponderance of amateur researchers, basically people without any formal training, um, are they a burden or a boon to ufology?
Um,
We have our professional amateur here, so Jack, I had to ask you that.
It depends. It depends. See, circling back momentarily to Weinberger's book, Imaginary Weapons, she did not have to know all about physics and hafnium bombs to be able to identify other people with these PhDs can't duplicate what these guys claim are happening in experiments. Like, see, you can be an amateur researcher and note things like that. You can be an amateur researcher and conduct FOIA requests. You can be an amateur researcher and ask Dr. Nolan, does he have anything besides cool stories? You know? And in that way, I think that amateur researchers are very much more a part of the solution than the problem. However, I'd also say that there really isn't and shouldn't be a quote ufology unquote. Mm-hmm. There is not something that qualifies it as a specialized field.
Are you saying it should die? Should ufology die, Jack?
I am not saying ufology should die. I am saying it's a social phenomenon that people with expertise in people can do a lot of work in it, a lot of significant work. When it comes to actual sciences, I think that, in my admittedly unprofessional opinion, I think that areas that already exist cover the bases. Meteorology, astronomy, you know, different other areas of study. And I say that because I came to the opinion that when you come at a UFO story looking for a UFO, you have already erred. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you can call it anything you want, but like someone that comes to mind here is Paul Carr and his group at Aerial Phenomena Investigations. They do good work looking for all of the standard answers first. You know, you can give them your sighting, and then they're going to look for all of the built-in things that are often known to happen. Where if someone comes at a UFO report and like in their initial report, they're writing about the orb that the witness saw and things like this, I don't see that as a scientific line of inquiry that can be done. Where like at Paul Carr and API, they do systematic research and look for things that it could be and ways to falsify that it's something extraordinary. And the best scenario you're going to get out of something like that is not sure what it was. So and that's the way to do it. And I mean, I had briefly mentioned to Leah earlier that I often I'll talk about the process of my personal experiences with this kind of stuff, but I really don't like to go into the how big was it, dime at arm's length, all this stuff, because we're not going to get to an explanation about something that happened years ago, and it just opens a whole can of worms of everybody's got their, and I don't want to hear their idea about what I saw years ago. I'm comfortable with, I don't know what it was, and that's where I'm going to be after I listen to somebody explain to me for 2 hours what I saw. And it was a pretty rough road at times getting to that realization. And so that's why I don't think that there is a scientific discipline looking for UFOs. There's a science to studying things in the atmosphere, but when you've set out to find that that flying saucer from another dimension, you've already erred from the scientific process.
Well, I feel vindicated, and I also agree with that final point of yours.
Thank you.
In this subject, I've often gotten the feeling that as science progresses, the subject recedes from the science, and that has been the case throughout history with respect to the earth sciences, like physics. Every mystery that we encounter, we apply observation, experimentation, the scientific method, and we end up discovering ultimately, at least every time in the past, that it's some kind of materialist physical phenomenon or what have you. With me, I brought this up regularly, but I'll just very briefly say I was surprised when I started looking at UFO stuff. I had never looked at this stuff before. I was never interested in any paranormal stuff whatever. Looking into it, though, I started seeing stories immediately of people who call themselves experiencers, self-described, identify. And it's like people like Deep Prasad, he's here in Canada, he's an entrepreneur and stuff. He's raised millions of dollars in venture capital, says he's interested in UFOs. His UFO or alien story that he says made him believe in UFOs in the atmosphere was that he was napping in the afternoon on his bed. He woke up, he saw an alien in his room for a few seconds, and then it dematerialized. And that's what leads him to think that the atmospheric, the things in the atmosphere are the same as the thing he saw in his room. And, he's like a doctor of physics or something. It's quite interesting that he thinks that. Now, it's personal to me because I have had hypnagogic hallucinations waking up for my whole life periodically. So I've seen entities in my room relatively regularly when I wake up. They're there for a few seconds and then they disappear. I never thought about it for a second because when I was a child, I went onto the internet and looked up what was happening, and I just dismissed it entirely, never thought about it again until I started looking at UFO stuff. So, if there was no evidence about brain function available to me, it would be very easy for me to believe fundamentally 200 years ago that I was in contact with something. To what extent, given that ball lightning has been verified to exist as of 2014 physical review letters, they got spectral analysis on it. It was over 1 meter wide.
Wait, say the thing.
Oh, that's from the UK report. That's not the same thing. I can't just whip that out randomly.
Sorry.
But this is something I've been thinking about. In a reality where large, I don't want to say the word, but large orbs of light are proven to exist and fly around in Earth's atmosphere, in the world where that has been proven is entirely different to me than the world where that does not exist. And so it leads me to think, to what extent, given that when you look into the UK Ministry of Defense historical records, CIA records, Air Force records, all of them have internal memos and reports directed at their superiors saying that they think that these are atmospheric phenomena. They're a novel form of atmospheric plasma. They think they're like ball lightning, but they don't quite know what they are. It leads me to think there's some kind of physical thing going on here that actually is going to come out eventually. I don't know that, but that's my interpretation. To what extent do you think that this whole thing actually has some possibility through these different channels? The experiencers with, brain science, like I'm describing, sort of the atmospheric stuff. Like Sarah Scholes actually wrote a scientific article, American article recently saying this is probably about atmospheric science. What do you think is going on there? Do you think that we're actually going to maybe one day get a resolution of this whole thing, or do you think that's just no chance?
I don't think it'll be a resolution to the whole thing, but I think that I would go as far as to say I'm pretty convinced that accounts for some reports. I've long thought that the Brown Mountain lights were interesting. The Hess-Dahlen lights almost certainly indicate some type of phenomena that is visible in that area from what I know about it. I think that there seems to be growing interest in lights of some type related to earthquakes. Seems to be an increasing possibility. So no, I don't think by any means that everything that's to be known is already in books somewhere. I think there's plenty yet to be discovered. It's just, I think you'll all agree, it's very important to proceed systematically and carefully and weigh our beliefs heavily, weigh the information heavily that people will try to misrepresent this evolving research as something it's not. And traditionally as well, these sensational stories get more get the legs. They're the ones that go around. Mm-hmm. And we tend to like that about ball lightning alone should be more common knowledge in this community than it is, but I was at a MUFON meeting once where a man left in anger during a presentation about identifiable flying objects. And I mean, he was clear, not what I came here to hear about. I want to know about what's not identifiable, left in a cuss, and I don't think that's a peculiar response from a certain one of those demographics of saucer people.
Someone actually asked me last episode to speculate, but Campbell, you're convincing me more and more to really consider that as an option for the case I'm looking into. It does really fit a lot of the descriptions. So who knows? I'm leaning more towards that myself. Just obviously, I can't conclusively say that yet. But
the thing that I found so funny is the documents inside the government. It's like, so we can say like the documents could be wrong in their conclusions, and they presented this information to the superiors, believing that it was true. Mm-hmm. But just the fact, for example, just the UK Ministry of Defense document in 2000, that we know that they briefed their top leadership that UFOs, in their words, indisputably exist, have all of the features of traditional UFOs, and mm-hmm. are a form of novel atmospheric plasma. Like, we know that all of the top leadership there was told that. And like, that is a conspiracy. That's a proven conspiracy based on The Guardian, BBC News, and The Wired reporting. So it's like, I guess we've been touching on these things, that this subject it's so mixed together with junk, and then there's so much like real stuff, and it begs the question, because when you study propaganda, you see that one of the main premises is to clog information channels with misinformation, disinformation, when you're seeking to misdirect people from things you don't want them to look at. Jack, to what extent do you think there's an active like intention from these governments to actually misdirect people? And what would you be able to define as like the core driver for why there is such a challenge in understanding the reason for the way the government communicates on this subject?
I don't have any reason to particularly believe that the public is the targeted people to be misinformed, other than to the extent, and oddly enough, John Alexander was who was quoted on this in a piece at the, might have been at The Intercept, I don't remember. But it's in The Grays Had Been Framed. It was because I thought the quote was interesting, as well as that it came from Colonel Alexander. But that basically propaganda is designed to affect the rulers of a foreign country, the rulers of our country, and the citizens, to lead them to believe that the cost is worth the treasure of what the government is doing, what it costs you in money, in lives, in sacrifice is worth it. So in that regard, I think that the public is targeted for information warfare, defense spending. The public will be more on board with upping the defense budget if they think information about UFOs might be forthcoming, for instance, something along those lines. But I think most of it is much more convoluted than that. And I think that I think that it's rare that a UFO hoax or a UFO scam is the intent. It's used for other purposes. Like off the top of my head, I would say, for instance, to see who's interested in it. You know, like if you say that there was this sensational craft flying near an Air Force base in Pensacola, then the Air Force base can track the IP addresses of who seems interested in getting the report about the description of that aircraft, things like that. I think there was a point in time when the internet was a little more crude, that some of the sightings databases like MUFON's reports and Newfork and some places like that, I think may have been monitored by intelligence agencies to see who obsessively is looking at these reports, the kinds of reports they're monitoring, suspecting them to be adversaries and bad actors that wanted to know descriptions of exotic classified aircraft, things like that. I think that those are common reasons for the stories. The topic in general, you know, would prompt me to ask people, if we're to believe that Luis Elizondo had responsibilities in some UFO program, much less ran it, does a counterintelligence specialist seem like a reasonable idea, or would you have gone with a scientist with air expertise in aerodynamics and aircraft? I mean, I think that and that goes back as well to the very beginnings in the mid 20th century, that in Wayward Sons, I documented a CIA career officer named Amos, Colonel Amos, and he was involved in just the craziest stuff that I have yet to get to the exact point of what he was doing, but there's certainly enough just stuff he was throwing on the wall that makes it reasonably apparent he was doing things around the UFO topic. For instance, he career CIA officer got in touch with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations and gave them a heads up. This was early 1950s, about a supposed UFO case that he thought, somebody would want to investigate. Now, if you start to need maybe a little backstory on these guys, that we might kind of wonder in the first place why the CIA would care if OSI is looking into something, why this long-term career officer served in the European theater all over the world, but now he's in DC and he decides to give OSI a heads up on a UFO report that he doesn't even know the people, just somebody told him. That's his story. Somebody told him about some people. And I got this OSI report, and this guy chases down the leads that evaporate, and a couple of the witnesses he couldn't confirm ever existed. And then another one of the witnesses eventually copped to it was a hoax. And you're just left kind of wondering not only what was it all about, but why did a CIA officer send an OSI agent out on this? And I kind of defer to the work of James Carrion and things like that. He has some interesting ideas that I think are on point about possibly code breaking and things like that, and looking for spy rings. That I just found it really curious that the OSI officer even said that a couple of the alleged witness names that Colonel Amos gave him, and Colonel Amos gave him the name of the man he originally got the story from. When the OSI officer asked the original guy about the witnesses that didn't exist, the original guy claimed he didn't know where Amos got those names either. So nobody's even taking responsibility for where these names came from that the CIA gave OSI. And so I found that curious, that essentially some of Carrion's work amounts to the idea of, if you threw a dye pack in a sinkhole and you see where the dye comes out, that perhaps Colonel Amos was looking to see, is this OS guy trustworthy? Is he compromised? Did they find out Amos was compromised when these names turned up? I don't know, but I think that stories like this are evidence enough that there's shenanigans with the intelligence agencies around these reports. Yes.
Did we have any audience questions that we want to get in?
No, I did star a couple. So one of the questions we got from Vancouver guy, Jeff, he's curious about Jack's thoughts on Gary Beckham and the Starstream research stuff on UFOs and spies. I feel like I just read a bunch of words, but I have no idea what they mean. So hopefully, Jack, you know what they meant.
Gary Beckham is, and I have not been in touch with Mr. Beckham in many years now, but he did back in the message board days. Open Minds Forum was one of the places that was Beckham's stomping grounds. And I think that his work is interesting. He did a lot of work around. He saw correlations between Stargate and MK Ultra, and some of the narratives that were going into the public domain, and I found it interesting. I thought I didn't agree with all of his takes, but I think that he presented some valuable perspectives and some instances that were valid. Excuse me. One other, if I may, and I'll try to make this one brief, instance that I think UFOs may play roles, like when we hear about that an intelligence agency went and got photos or interviewed a witness or something. I came across an FBI file one time while working on semi-related stuff, in which an FBI agent informed Hoover that if they wanted him to, he would approach this person they had under surveillance under the guise of there had been a car wreck in the vicinity he was in, and just ask him, did you see anything about this car wreck, and start talking to him about that. Because what they really wanted to know was this man was under surveillance, and he was a United States general, and he had been with some people that got out of his car and went in the Russian embassy, and they wanted to know who these people were. They did not have them identified. So one of the ideas was that the FBI would claim there was a car wreck in that vicinity, and somebody said you might have been around, and just start talking, and that should lead to who were you with and what were you doing, without having to completely blow their cover that they were investigating this man and the people he was hanging out with. And when I read that, I thought I could so see UFO stories being used for that. That somebody down the block said a triangle craft about 400 feet in the air. You see anything last night? Nope, not a thing. What were you doing? Anybody here with you that might have seen anything? What was their name? I could completely see that going on.
That's really interesting.
I thought so.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Look, we are just getting up to the top of the hour. Jack, Campbell, Nick, you guys, thank you so much for sticking around past our initial 90-minute goal here. Before we sign off for the night, Jack, what are you working on, and where can we find you?
You can find me most of the time these days at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. That's where I'm doing most of my blogging these days. Probably will post this video there as well. We have a video section that we're adding to and updating. I am working on more FOIA requests. I have some leads out about some stories we've been working on as well. And lots of things over time. That's one of the great things about FOIA. It often is not particularly useful for current things, but it will give you a batch of documents 2 or 3 years from now that you look at and go, wow, I'm really glad I ordered this. I had almost forgotten. And
it's like backing a really shitty Kickstarter.
Yeah,
with your tax money.
And it's really frustrating at first, because like all you're doing is submitting requests, and at first they're just always telling you that's too broad. You've got to limit the scope of that, and we don't have anything like that. Ask another agency. But then you kind of start to get the hang of it. It's still kind of frustrating because it takes a long time. But then after a long time, after your first couple years, then you keep doing it steady, like every week submit more requests. After a couple years, you start getting stuff pretty much regularly, and then it will be interesting. And again, I'll mention James Carrion, that something I felt I learned from him. He focused on a specific time frame, like the 1946, 1947 time frame, and he started researching that. I think there's something to be said for that. Just UFOs is too broad. The Cold War, the intelligence community, there's just too much there, and you'll get your chain yanked all the time when some spook jumps on YouTube. You've got a whole different story all of a sudden. So there's something to be said for going after a particular 80s story or 90s story. And then when you get the documents in 2 or 3 years, that story is
Oh, Jack, we made it 2 whole hours. Come on, internet.
So close.
hello.
Oh, there he is.
Yes,
Am I
there
here?
you are.
Yep.
I
Lagged
mean,
up.
loaded question, but
Yeah,
I think you
but-
are.
Yes. But yeah, like
I heard most of that.
They kept pulling the rug out from under us the past 5 years. So sometimes it's better to just focus on a specific era of history or a specific story or a specific crew, like out west in Utah, and see what you can find out about people like that and
Absolutely.
what stands up and what doesn't.
Well, Jack, thanks again so much for coming on this evening. I'm going to take you off the stream.
Thank you so much.
A lot, Jack. Oh, there he goes.
Yeah, he's gone. Campbell, Nick, anything going on with you guys before we wrap up?
It's been busy, Leah. It's like coming up to the holidays. I'm still sitting on that thread of tweets about John Brennan's comment about a different form of life that I'll release at some point. But honestly, I just haven't really felt like I've been too busy that I don't want to sit around and receive the negative comments yet. And there will be a day for that, but it has not come yet.
Twitter's like a louche buffet, man.
It's punishment. I need to be in the mood for it.
You need to indulge over the holidays, and then the first week of January you get back to the self-flagellation of posting on Twitter.
Absolutely, yeah. New year, yeah.
Middle of that. I'm not working on anything right now.
Excellent.
Hanging out.
Must be nice.
Must be nice.
I've been like working my tail off leading into the new year, but I'm super excited. Finally got like a skeleton up of my Art Bell project. We Own the Night, the legacy of Art Bell and Coast to Coast AM. I'm going to be building in public. So like building out this archive and repository for people to kind of follow along. I think that's really good. Like I think building in public is really instructive, and also it helps keep me accountable, right? Talking about my project, making sure I get things done.
That's so cool.
So I'm working on that.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the show, we are off next week. Everyone's doing their holiday stuff. I will be sitting in silent retreat with a Zen monastery. And then we will be regrouping the first Wednesday in January. I figure, I'm not totally sure what we'll be talking about, but I can say that the 18th we'll be talking to Sarah Scholes. Renowned researcher and writer, writing a ton about ufology, UFOs, aliens, etc., and a bunch of other cool stuff. And certainly, if anyone has any guests or subjects you'd like us to cover, please feel free to reach out either on Discord or on Twitter DM.
Someone in the comments said that Campbell will be appearing on their podcast this week.
Campbell.
Is that The Earth that they said? I wasn't looking. Okay, yeah. She has a great podcast started about the stories from people who have seen like orbs of some kind, and I agreed to do it because it was a very interesting project, and I, in one of my hypnagogic experiences, saw what I would call a sphere or an orb in my room. My interpretation of it is different from a lot of other people's that we talk to, but I think it's a very neat project because it's just all the different perceptions, experiences, and there was no judgment, no sort of projection. It was very neat combo. So I actually haven't heard it, the final product, but I'm excited to.
That sounds awesome.
Sounds like it's this week, so I'm going to be on the lookout for it.
Nice.
Yeah, keep us looped in, and we'll talk about it when we're back after the new year. Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much again for another successful roundtable of the Invisible Night School. Have a great holiday, Happy New Year, and we'll see you all in the new year.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yep.
See ya.